I'm here with Jimmy Song, the Bitcoin expert himself. Last time we chatted actually was back in January of 2019. And before that, you're actually in Sydney in the 30th of November 2018. Two very interesting times. It's good to be back. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It really has been like 7 years, huh?
It has been a long time. Now, and
Yes.
back in 2018 on the show, we were in this, I guess it was 2019, 2018. There was a key time. We were in this sort of unusual what they were calling at the time, but sort of a mining death spiral. And I know we talked about it on the show last
It's
time.
kind of like a horse and buggy manufacturer saying that cars have no future or something like that. Reminds me of like, I don't know, around 2000, Barnes and Noble going, "Oh, people are always going to buy books in a store," and like completely dismissing Amazon.
And now looking back at that, and it's 2026, do you think the skeptics in mining and Bitcoin have finally got no more ammo left?
No, I mean the mining death spiral FUD comes up every 4 years or so, and that's it's completely normal. We had it before the very first halving back in 2013. We had it again in 2017. We had it again in 2021, and of course we had it in 2025 as well. It's just something that people don't really understand, or they think they understand. It's their first time going through one of these halvings. And that mining death spiral FUD has been out there for as long as I can remember, and doesn't really seem to go away, even if you refute it. And that seems to be par for the course with anything Bitcoin related. You can refute things all day long, but people just keep coming back with the same old stuff.
And another thing back then, we were at, I think there was a moment we were at 3.6K or 3.7K. It was
Mm-hmm.
it was a it was a bit of it was an interesting moment in time
Mm-hmm.
for Bitcoin. But we're in six figures now, or if not, five. Obviously, we've gone to six.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but like in terms of the innings and the
Mm-hmm.
seasons of Bitcoin, do you still feel convicted on this 4 year cycle and where it continues to go? Where do you think it will go?
Yeah, I don't know if we were going to necessarily have the exact same 4 year cycles that we've had in the past. And the adoption of Bitcoin and the demand, supply and demand for Bitcoin vary. Well, the supply doesn't really change, but the demand varies quite a bit depending on world events, central bank monetary policy, inflation, things like that. So it's really hard to tell exactly how it'll all play out. My main conviction is that Bitcoin is the hardest money. It's the most scarce thing that we've ever seen, and for that reason, it's very desirable, and that it will eventually become the world reserve currency. In which case, it should be orders of magnitude greater in price than it is now.
And I think there's, just talking to that as well, there's this, if you were a retail investor, um
Mm.
and back then, we were at sort of 3.7K, doing a 10x, say, to 40K, it
Mm.
felt potentially reasonable. Well, actually, no, at the time I was actually say it didn't feel real. People were like, wow, when it hit 10,000 it was just insane.
Mm-hmm.
But now, at say, 81,000, which,
Mm-hmm.
give or take, we're trading at, doing a 10x would be 810,000. Like
Mm-hmm.
obviously that's an order of magnitude just purely
Mm-hmm.
from a psychological price. If,
Mm-hmm.
I think some people look at, the other day we were talking with another crypto investor who talked about the reason why people buy Ripple is because they just see it as cheap because it's, $1.40 or whatever it might be. And there's this obviously horrendous psychological idea of it being cheap or expensive, which actually has
Mm-hmm.
no relation, but purely. Do you think that do you think that perception of that price will affect its ability to continue to appreciate?
I really don't think so. We've had many orders of magnitude growth in Bitcoin, and you're absolutely right that there is like a deep unit bias that makes people go towards things that look cheap rather than are cheap. People don't know, for example, that Ripple has hundreds of billions of units, so they think, oh, it's only like a few dollars, but they also have hundreds of billions of units. That's like you have to do the math, and a lot of people just don't do that. Whereas Bitcoin only has 21 million, and each unit is obviously worth a lot more for that reason. But they're not thinking that way, and they want to own maybe a whole one or something like that. But those days are rapidly disappearing. I mean, it's going to be very difficult for somebody that's starting to stack today, unless they have substantial savings, to be able to own even one Bitcoin very easily. So it's getting to a much larger number, I don't think is that unrealistic. I mean, we like back when it was $100, 1,000 looked very crazy. Back when it was $1,000, a 10,000 looked very crazy. And we've hit $100,000. A million's gonna seem very similar. It's gonna seem unreal when we get there, but then there's gonna be like a little dip, and we're gonna be like, everyone that bought at the top lost money or something like that. When you just kind of get used to it. Humans have this ability to, um, you know, be very present biased and not really think retrospectively from what the future might hold and so on. And that shows up in these kinds of psychological biases that people have.
Every cycle, Jimmy, there's been a really strong narrative.
Mm-hmm.
We had digital gold for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think last cycle we had sort of institutional adoption to some extent, and governments, getting involved.
Mm-hmm.
What is sort of some of your I guess, bull narratives over the next 24 months? Are we talking about nation states? Are we talking about something that hasn't been named yet? I'm interested to understand what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's global reserve currency. We're going after that mantle, and it's largely because the dollar system is starting to break down, and we started seeing that with the complete isolation of Russia after the Ukraine invasion from the dollar system. Then a lot of OPEC and Middle Eastern countries started selling their oil for euros and yuan and not dollars. So the petrodollar is essentially on its way of crumbling, which has led in turn to a lot of central banks buying gold instead of dollars. And that's that slow sort of demolition of the dollar's reserve status, I think is showing that there's room for something else. And some of it is being taken up by gold, obviously, but I think there's a lot of room for Bitcoin, the fast settlement and ability to verify very quickly versus something like gold, which can be significantly filled with tungsten, right? Like you've seen those images online of gold bars that are laced with tungsten to give it a higher weight or whatever. That's not going to last. And I think there's a significant amount of proven gold reserves that haven't been dug up yet. Once the price goes up, a lot of that gets released into the economy, whereas Bitcoin has no such sort of adjustment on the supply based on demand. So I think we'll see Bitcoin as the world reserve currency eventually. Now, is it going to be over the next 24 months? I don't know, but I think it'll take steps to get there, especially as countries like Iran are being essentially barricaded from the US dollar system. Even the tether that they were collecting for tolls has been seized, right? So you're seeing nation states recognize that Bitcoin really is a politically neutral money, and for that reason, it makes sense to go get some.
And just sort of going back to this idea of, you talked about a global reserve currency.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us, can you sort of expand upon that, and what your vision is around that, and how different central banks will interact with each other?
Yeah, I don't know if everyday transactions are necessarily affected, but the reason why central banks are currently collecting gold is because they want to defend their currency against debasement or whatever, right? Like when you have if you want to export goods, you want your goods to be cheap relative to other currencies, and generally you do that by money printing. But at a certain point, all the foreign goods become too expensive. So what you need to do then is to buy back your own currency. Traditionally, that reserve currency to go buy back your own currency has been the dollar, but a lot of central banks are moving to gold, and I believe they'll be moving more towards Bitcoin as well. Because the more of that you have, the better you can defend your currency, and it's really about the utility of the tool. So, um, a central bank can possibly defend their own currency and prevent sort of that collapse, or have better um, management of its own currency by having this particular tool. But regardless, I think people will figure out, hey, like the currency that we're using, that the central bank is forcing us to use, is actually not that good, and I might as well be doing what the central bank is doing and accumulating Bitcoin as a way to protect against that. So that's really the bigger first step, is more people using it as savings, and that eventually leading to spending it in that way, because they lack any other thing. Once you're all in, or your fiat currency gets hyperinflated away, it's only at that point that you start spending the best asset that you have, because you have nothing else.